The glass doors of the towering office building closed behind him with a quiet thud that sounded far louder in his heart than it did in the street outside. Arman Haleem paused on the steps, staring down at the worn folder in his hands as if the papers inside had somehow betrayed him. Inside that building, just minutes ago, his future had quietly collapsed. The interview he had prepared for weeks had ended with polite smiles, careful words, and the unmistakable truth that he wasn't what they were looking for. The city around him was alive with daytime energy, cars honking, sunlight reflecting off skyscrapers, people rushing to lunch meetings, but Arman felt strangely invisible, like a man walking through the world with a silent storm inside him. And yet he forced himself to breathe, because somewhere across the city, a 6-year-old boy was waiting for his father to come home with good news. Before we continue this emotional journey, take a quick moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Whisper Tales 3 if you believe kindness and second chances can truly change lives. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts around the world. Arman slowly descended the marble steps of the corporate headquarters, each step heavy with disappointment. Just 3 years earlier, his life had been different. Back then, he had a small apartment filled with laughter, a stable job in a logistics company, and a partner who shared his dreams. But life had taken a brutal turn. A sudden illness had taken his wife within months, leaving him with grief he still couldn't describe and a young son named Ryan who clung to him like he was the only safe place left in the world. Since then, Arman had been living day by day, balancing grief, fatherhood, and survival. Jobs came and went. Bills piled up like quiet threats on the kitchen table. But the job he had just interviewed for at Heliox Industries was supposed to be the turning point. It was supposed to be the moment everything changed. The interview room had been intimidating from the moment he walked in. Polished wood table. Bright daylight pouring through enormous windows. 3 interviewers with perfect suits and careful expressions. They had asked about experience, strategy, leadership. Arman answered honestly, perhaps too honestly. He spoke about raising a child alone, about gaps in employment, about learning resilience instead of climbing corporate ladders. When the interview ended, the panel thanked him kindly. One of them even smiled sympathetically. But Arman understood what sympathy meant in corporate language. It meant rejection wrapped in politeness. Outside, the midday sun felt warmer than he expected. He walked toward the bus stop slowly, already calculating how he would explain the outcome to his son without sounding defeated. Ryan had drawn him a small picture that morning before school, a stick figure father wearing a tie with a bright yellow sun above him and the words written carefully in crooked letters, "Good luck, Baba." That drawing was still folded inside Arman's wallet. The thought of it made his chest tighten painfully. He wasn't afraid of hard work, but sometimes it felt like the world had quietly decided that people like him simply didn't fit into places like Heliox Industries. Back inside the building, however, something unexpected was happening. On the top floor, the company's billionaire CEO, Soraya Vance, had just finished reviewing a recording from the morning interviews. She had a habit few executives shared, occasionally watching interviews personally, searching for something that resumes and polished answers often failed to reveal. Most candidates sounded identical. Perfect degrees. Perfect confidence. Perfect rehearsed ambition. But one candidate had been different. A man who spoke slowly, honestly, almost awkwardly. A man who admitted failure without hiding it. Soraya replayed a short moment from the recording where Arman spoke about raising his son. The room had grown quiet then, not because the answer was impressive, but because it was real. Something about that authenticity unsettled her. In a world full of perfectly trained professionals, genuine resilience was rare. She asked her assistant for the candidate's file and realized something shocking. The panel had marked him as unsuitable within seconds of finishing the interview. Not because he lacked ability, but because his resume didn't shine like the others. Soraya leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. For someone who had built a billion-dollar company, she trusted instincts more than spreadsheets. And her instincts were suddenly telling her that the man walking away from her building might be exactly the person her company needed. Meanwhile, Arman had nearly reached the street corner when he heard hurried footsteps behind him. At first he ignored them, assuming someone else was rushing through their busy workday. But the footsteps grew louder, faster, until a voice called out his name across the bright afternoon air. Arman turned in surprise to see a woman in a sharp navy suit running toward him, slightly breathless yet determined. It took him a second to recognize her face from the company website. The realization struck him like lightning. The woman running toward him was Soraya Vance herself, the billionaire CEO of Heliox Industries. For a moment, the city noise seemed to fade. Soraya stopped in front of him, catching her breath while studying his confused expression. She had built companies, negotiated international deals, and commanded boardrooms filled with powerful people, yet right now she seemed far more interested in a quiet single father standing on a sidewalk with a worn folder. She explained calmly that she had watched his interview and believed the panel had made a mistake. She told him something no rejected candidate ever expected to hear: sometimes the strongest leaders were not those with perfect resumes, but those who had survived life's hardest tests without losing their integrity. Arman stood speechless, sunlight reflecting off the glass towers behind them while the city continued moving as if nothing extraordinary was happening. For months he had been told he wasn't qualified enough, experienced enough, polished enough. Yet here was one of the most powerful business leaders in the country telling him that the very struggles he carried were the reason she wanted him on her team. The moment felt surreal, like the quiet turning point of a film where the entire story suddenly shifts direction. Soraya offered him a position, not the one he had applied for, but a role designed for someone who understood people, pressure, and perseverance. She believed his honesty would bring something her company had been slowly losing: humanity. Arman felt emotion rising unexpectedly in his chest. Not pride, not relief, but something deeper, the fragile return of hope he had nearly buried. For the first time in years, he imagined going home and telling Ryan that something good had finally happened. As the two walked back toward the building together, Arman glanced at the drawing inside his wallet again. The small yellow sun Ryan had drawn suddenly felt symbolic, like a quiet promise that even the darkest mornings could lead to bright afternoons. Life had not magically erased his struggles, but it had opened a door at the exact moment he had almost given up knocking.